Welcome to Old Path Ministries and our study through the book of Joshua. We are in chapter 2 today, at least that's where we'll start. And we are pretty much introduced right at the very beginning to the conquest, if you will, or the taking of the land. What we looked at and wanted to kind of leave chapter 1 on its own. It was, if you will, the passing of the mantle of leadership to Joshua. And there are a couple of things I didn't really touch on last time that I want to do before we start here, because we go immediately in chapter 2 into the whole story that we know of Jericho. And it starts by the men going and spying out the land. And then the what we will cover today is the first foray, if you will, coming into the land, crossing over the Jordan. But before we do that, I wanted to take a look at a couple of things about Joshua that I just kind of find intriguing and interesting, and he can easily be overlooked about a few things. And I just want to kind of remind ourselves on those before we look at the text here. So let's turn to Joshua chapter 2, and we're going to pick up right there. Let's have a word of prayer. Father, we thank you so much for our time together and for your leading and your guiding of us through the study and for the work of your Holy Spirit in making the word to us alive, and that we might be able to not only study and understand the history, but we would know how you deal with your people. And we can take heart and see that even in times like this, that you will find those people who will turn to you even in the face of judgment, as we learn from these stories. And so we thank you so much that we can come to your word and that we can be instructed. We ask, Lord, that you would glorify yourself through the teaching of your word today. We give you all thanks and praise in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, so chapter 2. Here, what we're going to see after the spies come back and they begin to lead, Joshua is going to lead them into the land. I kind of was thinking a little bit about Joshua as I was reading through all of this, and there are some things that, again, because he was the right hand to Moses, there's no question, but Moses has such a unique place in history because of the Exodus and because God chose him the way that he did. But I think right next to him, Joshua is such an impressive figure. Now think about this. Joshua was there to see the parting of the Red Sea. He was there to see the miraculous things that took place. Think about this. He's one of only 2 adults that survived the whole thing at Kadesh Barnea, where he and the other spies went in to first spy the land, he and Caleb. They're the only ones that were ever able to go into the land, and God said so, and it was because they gave that good report. So we know that there would be times when Moses would meet with the Lord and there would be that verbal back and forth, and Joshua would have been there to see it. So here Moses is this man, and he has this place of such incredible prominence because of Exodus and because of receiving the law. And so he is seen as that one, that deliverer, that person that brings them out. But think about this, he's not the person that leads them into the promise. And so there is an end to the ministry of Moses, but it was incomplete. And until Joshua would pick that up, and you'll see in what we study today, God ends up taking him, Joshua, and uses him in ways that he used Moses. And he actually affirms that he is the man of God's choosing by the miraculous things that take place. And these miraculous things are on par with what happened with Moses. So when you start to think about his qualifications and who he is, this is the man who is tasked by God to bring them to that place of promise that was given all the way back to the very beginning with Abraham. So you could say that God made the promise to Abraham about a land and a people. And if it wasn't for the work that God did through Moses, they wouldn't have come out in the Exodus from their bondage and from their slavery. But had it not been for God tasking Joshua, Joshua would have to be that man to finally lead them in to that promise. He's also going to be used, he and Israel are going to be used as the instrument for God's judgment. Now, what we're going to find in chapter 2, because we're introduced to this person, Rahab. When we find out about Rahab, we see that she recognizes that the whole story about who the children of Israel are and what has been happening with them since the Exodus is known in the land. Now, there obviously is some some bit of information that must still be retained of what had happened from Abraham to Isaac to Jacob, because now here's the sons of Jacob coming back after hundreds of years of absence. But again, we're not told about all of this. We can only imply some things because she seems to have a pretty good working knowledge about who God is. And she comes to these spies, or these spies actually come to her, but she knows who they are. And she says, I know about you. I've heard about you. Now, what I'm asking is that when you come to conquer the land, we're terrified of you. And I want to, she says, she's going to petition them, save me and my family and don't have us destroyed with the rest. And so she realizes that judgment is coming. She sees it, and then she seeks remedy before judgment comes. Now, does that sound familiar? Yeah, you get the picture, right? So the idea that God has pronounced judgment, and he's going to use his people to do it in this case, to bring that hand of judgment. The bottom line is that God, the just judge of all things, is going to be judging this entire land, as we have read repeatedly. But even in the midst of that, someone who is of those people has come and sought the Lord for some kind of remedy to this problem, and we see that she's going to be saved alive. We're going to read a little bit about her, but I find it very, very interesting and sometimes overlooked in the genealogy of Jesus. Yeah, I mean, the genealogy of Jesus, Rahab is mentioned. So let's go ahead and look at chapter 2, verse 1. It says, Now Joshua, the son of Nun, sent out 2 men from Acacia Grove to spy out secretly, saying, Go view the land, especially Jericho. So they went, and they came to the house of a harlot named Rahab, and they lodged there. Now, again, when you look at what people write about this and commentators and everything else, it is so interesting to see how they discuss this whole thing. There are some that would say that Rahab may have been like a madam, or maybe she was actually a practicing harlot, or whatever else. Now, why would these spies, these men of Israel, go there? Well, if it's a house that's known for this, here's one possible way. They're doing what is a pretty clandestine thing, and so it's not that they're going to announce themselves, but they would go to a place that's a bit less conspicuous, and that would fit with why they would be going to a place like that. Being able to spy things out, you wouldn't go in a place where proper people would be as readily as something like this. Now, there are also people who say that they went there because they knew that that's what she was and they could find women and all the rest of it. I've heard that said too. And I just have to be reminding ourselves of this. Just because these are human beings put in human places and in these kind of situations doesn't mean that they're going to act in a particular way. I believe that Joshua was a very godly man. And I would believe that he would, as a godly man, realizing the importance of this, not just take some garden variety guys who would just do whatever they would want to do. So why they would be, going to this place, the thing that fits everything that we should know about this would be a place where you would go and be able to kind of fly a bit under the radar, or so it would appear, and yet they are still found out. So we read on. It was told to the king of Jericho, saying, Behold, men have come here tonight from the city, or from the children rather of Israel, to search out our country. So the king of Jericho sent to Rahab. So very specific. Guys are here. Rahab is the one who is mentioned. Now, there seems to be, obviously there is intelligence that comes back to him. How did it get back to them? Is it the devil trying to do it? Is it something that is even that crazy demonic? Who knows? We're not told. Just a report of guys that are really wanting to stay under the radar are found out to the very, very specific there at Rahab's house. So the king sends people there. The king sent to Rahab, saying, Bring out the men who have come to you and who have entered your house, for they have come here to search out all the country. The woman took the 2 men, hid them, said to them, Yes, the men came to me, she said, but the men came to me, and I did not know where they were from. And it happened, as the gate was being shut, when it was dark, that the men went out. Where the men went, I do not know, so pursue them quickly, for you may still overtake them. Now, this opens all kinds of debate and everything else. Is it okay to lie? And if the cause is right, is it all? People want to debate all of that stuff. Here's what I know. God is going to bring his people into the land. If God wanted to preserve these people, these two spies, supernaturally, he could do exactly that. Did he move upon Rahab to lie? Nothing in here would tell us that. God can bring about what he wants to bring about in any means, but he's not going to cause somebody to sin in the process. It's just not the way it works. Now, were they preserved because she was being dishonest and not being truthful and felt that she had good reason to do so? We can justify what people do all the time, but we don't blame it on God of saying that God put her up to lie. She just did what she thought was going to be bringing about the needed result. Now, again, is it that she is so concerned about them, or is it ultimately that she's concerned about herself? If we want to try to make her completely innocent, she could be concerned about those guys. She may be just doing this for self-preservation, and it's a totally human thing. I can't fault her for any of it. Well, so she says, hey, hurry, guys. They left already right before the gates closed. They jumped out. So go and catch them. You might be able to overtake them. She seems to put herself to them of being in their camp, of not wanting anything to do. I didn't realize who they were, but they left, and you can still catch them. They're not that far, right? So she brought them up to the roof. Here's what had happened. This is kind of a commentary. Before this had all happened, she had brought them up to the roof, hidden them in the stalks of flax, which she had laid in order in the roof, and the men that pursued them by the road of Jordan to the fords, as soon as those who had pursued them had gone out, then they shut the gate. Now, before they lay down, she came up to the roof. So the guys go, they leave. Interesting that they don't take her, they take her word for it and pretty quickly seem to turn around and go. And they head off in the direction, knowing where the children of Israel are camped. They try to overtake them, so they're gone. Rahab goes up, sees them, and now she's going to strike her deal. So before they lay down, she came up to the roof, and she said to the men, I know that the Lord has given you the land, that the terror of you has fallen on us, and that the inhabitants of all the land are faint-hearted because of you. So, interesting report. So once again, if the whole land is concerned, they don't make any overtures of peace. She's the only one that we have record of here where she says, I know who you are, I know what's going to be going on, I'm asking for mercy. So, interestingly enough, nobody else tries to do this. So the deal that she strikes with them, she says in verse 4, For we have heard that the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea, and that you came out of Egypt, and that you did. We heard what you did to the two kings of the Amorites, what you did on the other side of the Jordan, to Sihon and Og, whom you utterly destroyed. And as soon as we heard these things, our hearts melted, neither did there remain any courage in anyone because of you. For the Lord your God, he is God in heaven above and on earth beneath. Now, this seems to again be some kind of better inside information into and an insight into the nature of who God is. Now, they would be familiar with all of the pagan gods and all the rest of it. She says, it's pretty hard for me to ignore. Let me paraphrase. It's hard to ignore that the things that happened with you guys, it was miracle after miracle after miracle, and it is obvious that the God that you serve is the God of heaven and earth. So she comes to them recognizing that even in Jericho, there's no hope. Well, that's a pretty cool thing for her to recognize. But before we move on, I want to deal with her genealogy. If you've never had a chance to look at it before, or maybe you have and just kind of haven't looked at it in a while, it is very, very interesting to see who she is. Now, Matthew's genealogy of Jesus' birth is found in the first chapter. Unlike what you get in Luke's genealogy, some women are mentioned in this chronology, in this breakdown of the generations. At verse 4, we get these names that are not familiar to us. There are some of them that are used, there are other people by the same names that we might recognize. But it says, Ram begot Amminadab, and Amminadab begat Nahshon, and Nahshon begat Salmon, and Salmon begot Boaz. Now, when you hear Boaz, think Ruth and Boaz. Okay, great. So this is taking the genealogy all the way back to the beginning of the nation, And it brings us to the person of Jesus so that we are able to look at him and recognize that Jesus has a direct line all the way back to David. But this goes before David. Now, why is David so pivotal? Because it is the promise to David that there would be a king that would come from his line that would reign forever. And so this isolates the nation of Judah, the son of Jacob. And so through Judah would come Jesus. Jesus of Nazareth was a man of the tribe of Judah, so a Jewish man. With that being said, the promise was to David. So what we want to be able to do is link the genealogy of David, showing that he is, of course, Judah, of Judah. And then it goes forward from David, you can trace back the genealogy of Jesus. So both Luke and Matthew recognize the importance of this. And they put out for us what is, most people would believe, one shows his genealogy through Mary and the other through Joseph. That's a study for another day. But notice what we have here. So we have Solomon begets Boaz, and that was done. Boaz was begat by Rahab. Rahab was the mother of Boaz. Boaz begot Obed by Ruth. So Ruth and Boaz. But who was Boaz's mother? Rahab. So Obed by Ruth, and Obed begot Jesse. Jesse begot David, the king. There you go. So she figures, interestingly enough, one of the ladies, one of the females who is mentioned in the whole process, usually it's the son of. The son of, the son of, the son of, and it's always gone through the male part of it. Well, a couple of times ladies are mentioned here by name, Rahab being one of them. Pretty interesting. So, back to Joshua. And then it says to us in verse 11, as soon as we heard these things, our hearts melted, neither did there remain any more courage in any of us because of you. For the Lord your God, he is God in heaven above and on earth beneath. Now therefore, I beg you, swear to me by the Lord. And so give me this oath. Now, let's stop for a second and look at this. She is, it seems like she's kind of bartering or kind of trying to work some kind of a deal out, but she's in a place of absolute total vulnerability, but there's a courage in her, which is just kind of an impressive thing. So she says, I beg you, swear to me by the Lord, since I have shown you kindness, that you also will show kindness to my father's house, and to give me a true token, and spare my mother, or my father, my mother, my brothers, my sisters, and all that they have, and deliver our lives from death. And so the men answered, and they said, our lives for yours, if none of you tell this business of ours, and it shall be, when the Lord has given us this land, that we will deal kindly and truly with you. Now, they are willing to do this, but you'll notice on a couple of these times, there is still this, okay, but there's a contingency here. You've been kind and you've seen to our lives being spared, so we'll see to yours as well. So our lives for yours. However, this cannot be told to anyone what's going on here. So if you're being truthful, then you will continue to be truthful. It's kind of there's an accountability that's going on here. And so we see in verse 15, then she let them down by a rope through the window, for her house was on the city wall, and she dwelt on the wall. Now that gives you a little bit of an idea of the fortifications that there are in Jericho. And so we'll get to that when they go to the conquering of this. What we have in this chapter here, they've been given no instructions about how this is supposed to happen. So they don't know that it's going to be a pretty odd, miraculous thing that God does by bringing down these walls. Joshua is acting based on what he has, and that is, it's going to be a military kind of a thing, so he's sending out reconnaissance. That's just what generals do. It's what military action would require. You don't go in blindly. But they know that Jericho is the first prize. And so we'll have a graphic up, or I'm putting up a graphic that will show you the potential route. And you see that as soon as they come across the Jordan, it's the first thing that they would want to encounter as far as the really big cities. And it's the beginning of the conquest of the land. And so with that being said, it says in verse 16, so she said to them, Get to the mountain, lest the pursuers meet you. So don't go in the same way that you would come out, because you might catch them as they're on their way back. The people that went out looking for you are going to be coming back down the same road. So don't use that road to go back to your places. Go off. There's mountains that are there. Go in that direction. And as you'll see, until she said to them, go into the mountain lest the pursuers meet you. Hide there for 3 days until the pursuers have returned, and afterward you may go your way. So give ample time for them to go and to come back, and then you come out and you go back. And so they'll avoid meeting one another on the road. Verse 17 says, so the men said to her, we will be blameless of this oath of yours, which you have made us swear, unless when we come into the land that you bind this line of scarlet cord in the window through which you let us down, and unless you bring your father, your mother, your brothers, and all of your father's house and in of your household to your own home. So anybody who is willing to come in. Now, scarlet cords and all the rest of it, and this token and all of it, there's so much that is symbolic here. And you never want to over spiritualize things, but you can pretty much see that there is a picture that is being illustrated here for us, and it really is in keeping with how God does the things that he does. Judgment is at hand. That's without dispute. Here is a person in Rahab that is told, if you will make good on your promise, keep our time here and what we're going to be doing concealed. Now take this cord, bind it around the window of your house, and when it comes that we come in here, anyone who is going to be in the house, they will have their lives preserved because of this token, this sign. Now, if we want to go into tokens and signs and imagery and all the rest of it, let's remember that when it comes to Joshua and the children of Israel, at the first of the Passovers, that meal that they had, there was all of the pictures that were being put there, illustrations, if you will, the blood of the lamb being on the doorposts, and the people that were inside, that they would be safe if they stayed inside. There are so many parallels to this in this whole thing that's going to happen at Jericho. Now, if we go fast forward and we say when it comes to the church and the idea of judgment, it is once again if you will, the sign or the token, the seal, whatever you want to call it, in the blood of Jesus Christ. It is what covers us, that when judgment comes, we are covered by the blood. We are cleansed. And so, it's crimson. It's the same color as this cord. The imagery that is there seems plenty deliberate because it goes perfectly with what happened at the Exodus on that night of Passover. And now here again, judgment comes. The walls are going to fall, and the city will be absolutely plundered and destroyed, except for you and anybody who comes in. These are the terms. The terms are, they come into your home, and you're the only one who's made this deal with us. All the rest of the people are going to be left to their own devices. If there are people who are willing to come in, they will be saved. We read that a little bit more. There's some more that's here. So they said, so it shall be that whoever goes outside the doors of your house onto the streets, his blood will be upon his own head, and he will be, and we will be guiltless. And whoever is with you in this house, his blood will be on our head if a hand is laid upon him. Now, again, this is so reminiscent of the Passover. But remember again, a person wants to avoid the wrath that is coming. And then the conditions are given by these two spies. Okay, here's what you've asked for. Here's the contingencies. You make good on your promise to conceal these things. Here's this cord. You bind it on the windows. When we come, if the people will stay in this house, the people who are in this house will be saved from what's about to take place. But if they go outside, it means that there's no other option. They may have full knowledge of all this stuff, but if they don't take the provision that is made, they will die, and they will have only themselves to blame because they have been warned. If they exercise their choice in the other way, it's no one's fault but their own. You see some real interesting parallels here with what I believe is the gospel. Same exact thing. God makes it abundantly clear. Here is how it is that you will be preserved when judgment comes. There's no way out of it. You may know full well what it takes, but unless you are going to be observant and obedient to what God has said, you're going to die like the people who didn't know. Very, very serious stuff, and very intriguing when you study it. Verse 20 tells us, "And if you tell this business of ours, then we will be free from your oath which you made us swear." Second time that they've said that. "And then she said, according to your words, so be it. And she sent them away, and they departed, and she bound the scarlet cord in the window." Okay, so it's all been said, it's all been done. Now it's going to take a few chapters until we return to this at the actual conquest. There's going to be a break after chapter 2. The spies have done what they've done. They've seen everything. They're going to bring back the report to Joshua. What they're going to find is that when they actually get to Jericho, God has some instructions for what they are to do that are they're just bizarre. I don't know how else to say it. But again, they were done deliberately, as he did with Gideon and some other times when they're asked to do some bizarre things. But the only reason that they're bizarre to our understanding is because they would never be able to stand after it's all done and said, look at us and our military prowess that we've overcome this. They're just going to have to say, God asked us to do the most insane thing, and we had nothing to do with the actual victory. That's the intent. That's the reason. Man would never be able to take any kind of credit for what God did in miraculous sense in ways that makes no sense. And you'll see it when we get there if you're not that familiar with the story. Verse 22 says, "Now they departed, and they went to the mountain. They stayed there for the 3 days until the pursuers returned. The pursuers sought them all along the way, but they did not find them." Notice that. All along the way. So what Rahab had told them, look, these guys are going to be coming back that road, but this gives the impression that as they came back, they were looking to see if they hid. What she said is get so far away from the road up into the mountains, wait those 3 days, and then you'll be able to go back and, they won't find you. Verse 23, "So the two men returned. They descended from the mountain, crossed over, and they came to Joshua the son of Nun, and they told him all that had befallen them. And then Joshua said, truly the Lord has delivered all the land into our hands, for indeed all the inhabitants of the country are faint-hearted because of us." Now, think about what is just being said there. Here, Joshua is able to say, it's evident, it's clear that God has done exactly as he said that he would do. So he's very much comforted by this. This is something that he says, obviously everything that I've been promised is genuinely going to be fulfilled. These are all the things that he knew from what God had said to him in chapter 1. Now there's going to be more of it in chapter 3 that you'll find, as I had said before. This really puts Joshua in this place of incredible prominence. And think about him in the historical sense. Joshua is an incredibly fascinating guy, and yet because he had to work in the shadows of Moses, you don't really know that much about him unless you've taken the time to study. But talk about an important and an impressive man who was incredibly faithful and had a great reliance upon the Lord. Was he perfect? No. Were there times that he made assumptions he shouldn't have made? We're going to read about those things. And there's those times, a great cautionary tale to us. We may be so used to God doing some things a particular way that we don't check in with him all the time. They're going to learn that lesson the hard way at Ai, and we'll get to that eventually, just here in a couple of chapters. Now, chapter 3. "So Joshua rose early in the morning, and they set out from the acacia grove, and they came to the Jordan, he and all the children of Israel, and they lodged there before they crossed over." Now again, it's a little unclear at the exact location of some of these, but we have a very good idea that we do know where Jericho is, and they've excavated, they've found Jericho, and so Jericho would be here. It makes perfect sense that they're just across the Jordan, not far from it. It would, if we have a straight line, it makes sense. Now, Gilgal is the one that there is still people that like to debate the whole thing. Is it north or is it south and east of Jericho or not? I'll show you some maps. I'll be putting them up as we go through this so that you're able to see them. So it says that they lodged right at the Jordan. And so it was after 3 days that the officers went through the camp. And they commanded the people, saying, "When you see the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God, and the priests, the Levites, bearing it, then you shall set out from your place, and then you will go after it. Yet there shall be a space between you and it, about 2,000 cubits by measure. Do not come near it, that you may know the way by which you must go, for you have not passed this way before. So if you think about the mass of people, probably a couple of million people, we've mentioned that before, you've got such an enormous sum of people that it would be easy for them to get spread out. He's saying, look, put distance between you and just follow in the footsteps. Now we're going to understand the importance of that, because they're going to come to the water of the Jordan and they're going to have to figure out, how do we get across this water? They have a similar problem in what they had at the Exodus. The difference is they are coming into the land as conquerors. They're not fleeing the land as slaves. Now they are in the place where God is saying, I'm going to do these miraculous things. You're not in the place of fear. You're in the place of conquest. It's a very big juxtaposition that's happened in these 40 plus years. Now, it says in verse 3, so they commanded the people when you see the ark. Verse 4 says, yet there shall be a space between you and it, 2,000 cubits. And then 5, Joshua said to the people, now sanctify, set yourselves apart, for tomorrow the Lord will do wonders among you. This is the idea of getting your mind right. Get yourself settled. The Lord's going to do this thing. Sanctify is getting yourself in the proper sense, spiritually speaking. Sanctify, set apart. Acknowledge the fact that God is about to do great and miraculous things. Be focused. So Joshua spoke to the priests, and he said, now take up the ark of the covenant, cross over before the people. And so they took up the ark of the covenant and they went before the people. And the Lord said to Joshua, now that's important, recognize it. The Lord said to Joshua. We're so used to, up to this point, the Lord spoke to Moses. Sometimes Moses and Aaron, and then sometimes it was Moses and Eleazar. It was, different people. Now the Lord comes directly to Joshua. The Lord said to Joshua, this day I will begin to exalt you in the sight of all Israel, that they may know that as I was with Moses, so I will be with you. You will command the priests who bear the ark of the covenant, saying, when you have come to the edge of the water of the Jordan, you shall stand in the Jordan. Go into the water. You're going to stand to it. Now remember, with Moses, take your staff. And he has the staff, puts it to the water's part. In this case, a different thing altogether. But notice it's God saying, okay, the thing with Moses is completed. No longer are you going to be on that side of the Jordan. You're now going to be brought into the land. That's going to be done through you. I'm going to do with you as I did with Moses, and the people will know. And so then it is, you tell the Levites, you tell the priests, those people bearing the ark. Notice God did not go to them directly. He goes to Joshua. Joshua then says to them, go to the water and then go in. But this is, imagine being Joshua. God has told him, be strong, be courageous, told him 3 times in the first chapter. But now it's, if you will, the rubber meets the road. Now they're actually going in. The action is taking place, and he's going to put this incredible confidence in Joshua, knowing that God is going to go before them. Verse 9, so Joshua said to the children of Israel, come here and hear the words of the Lord your God. Joshua said, by this you will know by the living God that he is among you, and that he will without fail drive out from before you the Canaanites, the Hittites, and the Hivites, the Perizzites, the Girgashites, and the Amorites, and the Jebusites. Now behold, the ark of the covenant of the Lord of all earth is crossing over before you into the Jordan. They've seen and they've been aware of how God has done the things that he's done before. The ark had a place of incredible prominence. But remember here, the confidence that was given to Joshua by God. Now Joshua is going to, in the same way, say, prepare yourselves and pay attention to what's happening. The Lord is doing this great work. Now be careful to recognize what is taking place. We're about to go over. Therefore, take for yourselves 12 men of the tribes of Israel, 1 man from each tribe. And it shall come to pass, as soon as the soles of the feet of the priests who bear the ark of the Lord of all earth, will rest in the waters of the Jordan, that the waters of the Jordan will be cut off, the waters that come down from upstream, and they shall stand in a heap, or as a heap. So this, again, incredibly reminiscent of what had happened at the Red Sea. But notice, God is doing something a little bit different this time. It is still the miraculous waters being pulled up and made in a column, stopped so that they can pass through. The difference this time, there's a priesthood that's in place now. That wasn't in place at the Exodus. They hadn't had that yet. Now it is that this ark would go before them, and this ark was going to serve a very prominent role in the history of Israel for centuries to come. What's so impressive about this, when you really stop to think about it, it's a very, very important thing that we recognize, that here God is going to do visually the same thing that he did at the Red Sea. Only it's not by Moses and his staff. It is at the words of Joshua, but it is through the ministry of the priests and the Levites with the Ark of the Covenant leading the way. The people are going to know that the same God who led them out at the Red Sea is the one who's leading them in through the Jordan, but it would be led by the priesthood, and this was a spiritual matter. All of this would have to be playing in their minds. Now, it will come to pass as the soles of the feet of the priests that the water's going to part. Verse 14 says, "So it was when the people set out for the camp to cross over the Jordan, that the priests, bearing the Ark of the Covenant before the people, and as those who bore the Ark came to the Jordan, and the feet of the priests who bore the Ark dipped into the edge of the water, for the Jordan overflows its banks during the whole time of the harvest." So it's not just some little tiny body of water, some little trickle. There are places even now where the Jordan, it's narrowed considerably since these times because it's used so much up in the north for irrigation and all the rest of it. It's why the Dead Sea is kind of drying up. There's all kinds of interesting things that are going on there. But the Jordan was a pretty formidable river. And so everything that was coming out of the Sea of Galilee would have come down the Jordan River and emptied into the Dead Sea. That's just the flow of the water as it goes down. So for them to be able to go through, it's still a formidable thing. Women and children and, the mass of people, it's a pretty amazing thing that's going to take place here. So going over on dry land is going to be incredibly important. But notice each one of the tribes are represented here too. So the symbolism of this, God has created a priesthood that will serve the people for centuries. He has created it, and they are going across, but a representative of each of the tribes is going as well. The importance of that is the recognition that this is now the promise that God had given to Abraham, that it would be his descendants. Abraham to Isaac, Isaac to Jacob, Jacob to his sons, represented by these 12 tribes. They're going to go through and they have a role to play in this. So if you see this in the visual sense, God had his people that all the way back, Abraham was told in Genesis 15 that your people, though I've given you the promise, your descendants are going to be in bondage to a foreign nation. And it would be that 400 years, but they would be released from it. God has done that by raising up Moses. Moses has brought those people, formerly slaves, out into the freedom. During that time after they left Egypt, they were given the law. They were going to be governed by God as a people, but they would have a codified law where God would say, this is acceptable, this is not acceptable. These are the things that you do, these are the things that you will not do. That's God's design. Whether they would do it, they were at least given that instruction. Now, again, as they leave as freed slaves along the way, they have become now military. In that way, they have become conquerors. And it was in lands where they didn't want to occupy. Actually, if you remember, as we studied through that over the past couple of years, as they went through those lands, they didn't want war. War came to them, and they just wanted to pass through the land. Look, we don't want to take anything that belongs to you. We don't even want to be here. We're going somewhere else. But we know the story of a number of things that took place, but militarily, nobody could stand against them. Here, too, when they come into this land, God's already promised, nobody's going to be able to stand against you, so don't be fearful. Now they're about to go in. What you see represented is the victors. The conquest is taking place. The conquerors are coming into the land, once again directed by God, led in the spiritual sense by the priesthood, the Ark of the Covenant. Now the people were to go in and be courageous because God is delivering the land into their hands. Now, it is important to say it once again. People read these chapters, and when things of war come up, They look at it and they say it's cruelty, God mandates, genocide, and they love to throw out all of that nonsense. But they do it for a couple of reasons. Not because they're necessarily convinced, as when I've discussed it with them. They just have an agenda. They probably read it on a blog somewhere, and they just repeat what they've been told. Here's the thing. God doesn't have to ask permission to do anything for the things that he does. And he's going to judge who he is going to judge when he is going to judge them, and it's not going to be a big secret. Now, the people that are in this land had become so craven in their idolatry and their wickedness that all that was left is that God would have to judge them. There would be these people from time to time, Rahab is an example of it, who said, we know that this is going to come, but we also recognize who God is, and they seek mercy and they receive it. So for those people that want to say God's a God of blood and genocide and everything else, look, if he doesn't do this through his people, they would then be corrupted in the same way, which does happen to them eventually. But let's get it out of our minds that, look at what God is doing. It's so cruel. God is now at this place of saying, I'm judging these people for their wickedness, and if it were to remain, it would end up infesting my people too. So God is making good on one promise, giving his people the land that he had promised to them. At the same time, he's using those very same people as his hand to bring about the judgment that was earned by the people in the land. So it's just, we need to look at these things through the spectrum of how does God view it rather than human sensibilities. So, because it really does become a discussion in the church. Well, how would a God of love send people to hell? Well, they send themselves. Look at Jesus' words in John chapter 3. Right after, for God so loved the world, he said, look, I did not come into this world to condemn it, but that through me it might be saved. So if it's not saved, it's not on God, it's on those people. They've been warned. Same here. Now, so it says, verse 14, so it was when the people set out from the camp to cross over the Jordan with the priests bearing the ark of the covenant before the people. And as those who bore the ark, they came to the Jordan, and their feet of the priest that bore dipped into the edge of the water. It overflows at the harvest. Verse 16 tells us that the waters which had come down from upstream stood still and rose in a heap very far away at Adam, a city that is beside Zaratan. Now, once again, difficult for us to know for sure where this is, or we'd have a pretty good idea of the route of the crossing. But even now, it's still debated. What we do know geographically, it fits within a particular area, because Jericho's here. It's not that they've gone so far south, or they're not so far south, rather, or north. We know that they're in Moab, and they've come through that particular area. We were able to trace that back through the last books as they were going north, but they were then, if you will, they were on the eastern side of the Jordan River. So we know about how far north they went. We know that they were east of the Jordan, and Jericho lies over here. So we got a pretty good idea. It's a straight shot across. Verse 16. So the ones that came from upstream, they stood still, and it was between somewhere around Adam and Zaratan. That's what we don't know for sure where those are. So the waters that went down into the sea of the Arabah, the salt sea, they failed and they were cut off, and the people crossed over opposite Jordan. So this is just a lot of words to say. The waters that were to the north and to the south walled up, and they were able to cross through. Again, this is reminiscent. They've seen this before, or they know of it before. So it says, verse 17, then the priests who bore the ark of the covenant of the Lord stood firm on dry ground in the midst of the Jordan, and all of Israel crossed over on dry ground until all the people had crossed completely over the Jordan. Now, this would be commemorated, needless to say, as we see in chapter 4. And it came to pass, when all the people had completely crossed over the Jordan, that the Lord spoke to Joshua, and he said, take for yourselves 12 men of the people, 1 man from each of the tribe, and command them, saying, take for yourself 12 stones from here, out of the midst of the Jordan, from the place where the priest's feet stood firm. You will carry them over with you, and you will leave them on the lodging place where you lodge tonight. So again, lots of symbolism. They're going to be reminded of this. It's a very important, actually, it's not just a very important, this is one of the most monumental things that has happened in the entire history of the nation of Israel. They're finally coming into the land. It was promised hundreds of years ago to Abraham. They are finally taking the land as the committed tribes of the children of Jacob. It's a big deal. So the stones that would be taken up would be taken from inside of the river and then brought onto dry land, and they would be assembled in such a way that they would be a reminder. Every time they would look at those, or if you're going to see, every time that it becomes a matter of discussion, it said, those stones, they used to be in the middle of the Jordan River. There's 12 of them representing each one of the tribes, and that is to commemorate when God brought us across on dry land, and those rocks used to be underwater. Now they're on top of the land. Big imagery here. Joshua, verse 4, Joshua called the 12 men and whom he had appointed from the children of Israel, one man from every tribe. And Joshua said to them, now cross over before the ark of the Lord your God into the midst of the Jordan, and each one of you take up a stone on his shoulder, according to the number of the tribes of the children of Israel. And this may be a sign among you when your children ask in times to come, saying, what do these stones mean to you? And then you will answer them and say, that the waters of the Jordan were cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord when it crossed over the Jordan. The waters of the Jordan were cut off, and these stones shall be for a memorial to the children of Israel forever. This is again that idea that you pass it on from generation to generation. You don't let them figure it out for themselves. If you've been studying with me for any amount of time, you'll know that I talk about this from time to time. It makes me nuts when I hear parents say, well, I don't want to make my kids believe anything. I want them to make up their own minds. I'm sorry if this offends anybody who's hearing it, but that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Because that means that you're going to let somebody else influence them. Well, I want to be a witness to them by my actions. Great. Do it with words as well. And make sure that you're able to tell them, here's where you come from. So has God done something miraculous and incredible in your life? There's one event for sure. If you're a believer, you got saved. That's miraculous. That's monumental. Let's pray that you don't stay in that place of infancy, but you want to be able to pass along and say, here's what God has done, and he's been faithful all along. You want to be able to remind your kids of that. That's what's being done here. It's very, very important that we recognize this. So, in verse 8, so the children of Israel did so, as Joshua commanded, took up 12 stones from the midst of the Jordan, as the Lord had spoken to Joshua, according to the number of the tribe of the children of Israel, and they carried them over with them to the place where they lodged, and they laid them down there. Then Joshua set up 12 stones in the midst of the Jordan in the place where the feet of the priests who bore the ark of the covenant stood, and there they are to this day. So the priests who bore the ark stood in the midst of the Jordan until everything had been finished that the Lord had commanded Joshua to speak to the people, according to all that Moses had commanded Joshua, and the people hurried and crossed over. And it came to pass, when all the people had completely crossed over, that the ark of the Lord and the priests crossed over in the presence of the people. So the priests would have gone in with the ark, they would have stayed in the water. As the procession of people go by, there are 12 that are asked to pick up stones close to where the priests and the Ark of the Covenant were, and all of the people crossed over. The priests are still there with the Ark of the Covenant, and those men have taken the stones and they've gone on. So the procession kind of changes. Starts with the priests, they get out into the water, the people pass by them, and now they're going to follow them out. So it came to pass when all the people had completely crossed over, verse 11, that the ark of the Lord and the priests crossed over in the presence of the people. The men of Reuben, the men of Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh crossed over, armed before the children of Israel, as Moses had spoken to them. Interesting, they're mentioned here. Those are the 2.5 tribes that ended up staying on the east of the Jordan. But they were told they needed to come into the land until the conquest was over. About 6 or 7 years these men would be separated from their land and from their families. But it says in verse 13, about 40,000 prepared for war crossed over before the Lord for battle to the plains of Jericho. So the military people were the ones who went out first on the other side of the shore was it a show of force, or was it because they didn't know for sure if there was going to be trouble that would await them there? Again, they weren't given a lot of instruction about what to expect on the other side. They just did as God had said about the priests go out and then the procession happens. Now, in verse 14, on that day the Lord exalted Joshua in the sight of all of Israel, and they feared him, as they had feared Moses all the days of his life. And then the Lord spoke to Joshua, and he said, now command the priests who bear the ark of the testimony to come up from the Jordan. Bring them out. They're the last ones that are there. Joshua therefore commanded the priests, saying, come up from the Jordan. And it came to pass, when the priests who bore the ark of the covenant of the Lord had come from the midst of the Jordan, and from the soles of the priests' feet, when they touched dry land, that the waters of the Jordan returned to their place, and they overflowed their banks. Now, once again, usually the focus is on what happened at the Red Sea, and I've watched all those lame documentaries by people trying to explain through natural means how God parted the Red Sea. It's comical. But again, it's man trying to explain away the miraculous. Once again, people can try to say that they found, dry, very shallow parts to go across. That's the excuse that they use at the Red Sea. Clearly, the text here doesn't even leave that open as a possibility. And if anybody is questioning, the priests were the last ones that were there. The water was walled up, and as soon as they hit dry land, everything goes back. So, if you want to try to explain this through natural terms, just save your breath. You can go ahead and believe whatever you want to believe, but the text does not leave that option open to you, that there's some simple explanation that's not miraculous. This was full-on miraculous. Now, so verse 19, now the people came up from the Jordan on the 10th day of the first month, and they camped in Gilgal on the east border of Jericho. And these 12 stones, which they took out of the Jordan, Joshua set up in Gilgal. Now, these are not there any longer. They would have been taken for any number of reasons. Then he spoke to the children of Israel in verse 21, and he said, when your children ask their fathers in time to come, saying, what are these stones? This is the second time that this has been instructed to them. Then you will say to your children, or let your children know, saying, Israel crossed over the Jordan on dry land. For the Lord your God dried up the waters of the Jordan before until you had crossed over, as the Lord did at the Red Sea. Now, to their minds, that would be an amazing thing. God has now done through the agency of Joshua what he did through Moses. A similar miracle has now taken place. One, they were fleeing as fearful slaves. Now they're coming in as conquering victors. This has all taken place, but it's the same God who has done this, and this is the unveiling, if you will, of his plan. So, it dried up at the Red Sea just as he did, and then they crossed over. Verse 24 tells us that all the people of the earth may know that the hand of the Lord, that it is mighty, and that you may fear the Lord your God forever. Now, that fear is a matter of reverence and not fearfulness of terror, being afraid of him. That remains to this day. It is good for us to have reverence for God, but we're not called to be afraid of God. He loves us, and he's given himself for us. We also want to have an incredible amount of respect and awe for who he is. So we'll pick up in chapter 5 next week. And it is, they're going to start to take that conquest of the land. It's going to get quite interesting over the next couple of chapters. Hope that you're enjoying it so far. This will be an incredible book to study through. So until next week, I pray that God blesses your pursuit of him.